Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome North Korean human rights advocate Seohyun Lee.
Good morning. I'm truly honored to stand before such esteemed leaders and advocates for freedom to share my transformative journey from a world where freedom was a myth to one where it is daily reality. I was born in Pyongyang, the capital city of North Korea, with isolation and 24/7 indoctrination. I lived as a true believer of the regime, fully immersed in its ideologies and believing its contrived greatness. However, my perspectives began to change dramatically when I witnessed those injustices around me. I saw my best friend, Sujong, sent to a political prison camp because her father worked for Kim Jong-un's uncle, Jang Sung-taek. I knew a baby girl from my neighborhood desperately searching for her mother, who was arrested for guilt by association. My heart felt heavy with pain, but I didn't fully grasp what was wrong, accepting the life as it seemingly had to be. In time, these events transformed me into a double thinker, outwardly confirming, yet internally questioning. My experiences studying in China as a North Korean elite allowed me to confront the harsh realities and its brutalities. Those realities I had accepted without question previously. And this was the beginning of endless struggle. Up to this point, I had been blissfully ignorant and began to realize the moral contradictions existing in North Korea. Eventually, I realized that the only way to get out, to escape, but leaving North Korea meant giving up the privileges, status that I had been able to enjoy due to my father's higher level position in the country, and obviously the loved ones. Actually, giving up the privileges and social status given to our families was the least worries for my family. The biggest concerns were the family members left behind in North Korea and those uncertainty of unpredictable future in a new place. But staying in North Korea would mean a life of unspoken truth and the potential executions for myself and my family members. With our lives on the line, we embarked the perilous journey as non-believers. I vividly recall the day we departed Dalian Airport in China after making the decision to seek asylum. It was entirely surreal. I never thought about the day would happen to me. I mean, every moment was shadowed by the fear of being captured by the Chinese public security or North Korean agents. It was as if a gun pointed at the back of my head all the time. It was only after transiting through a third country and boarding to a South Korean Airlines flight to Seoul that I could finally breathe a sigh of relief. And at that moment, I was overwhelmed with unfamiliar emotions. I couldn't say goodbye to anyone. I couldn't explain to people why my family made such drastic decision. And it broke my heart to think that my respected and beloved father had to bear the disgrace of being labeled a traitor by those who once trusted and admired him. And there was also the moment, the profound sadness when I realized the possibility of not being able to going back to my country and seeing the loved ones again in my lifetime. Carrying these complex mixed feelings, we landed in the freedom and started a new life in America in 2016. Here, I quickly learned that no zookeepers was coming to feed us anymore. The newfound freedom meant I had to plan, work, and take responsibilities for my future. You know, in North Korea, the regime controlled every moment of our lives, determining how and where we spend our time, only and always to the regime's benefit. But in stark contrast, the United States gave me the right to choose how I spend my time. This newfound freedom transformed me into a human rights advocate, deeply inspired by President Bush's commitment to North Korean human rights. Upon learning about the North Korean Human Rights Act, I was astonished and inspired to discover that there was a policy actually aimed to help the people in North Korea, not the regime. Witnessing the dedication of those committed to help people thousands of miles away, I was so moved and inspired to advocate for my fellow North Koreans. And believing that knowledge is power, I decided to pursue further education in America. Now I'm enrolled at Columbia University's School of International and Public Affairs. My educational and activist aspirations, however, would have been impossible without the support from the Bush Center. The Lindsay Lloyd North Korea Freedom Scholarship has been a beacon of hope, empowering refugees like me to thrive in the newfound freedom. And I believe it also inspires freedom lovers worldwide. In my closing, I want to echo President Bush's human spirits seek freedom. This profound truth resonates deeply with my own journey from a country where freedom was just a dream to one where I can actually advocate for it. And as we continue to fight for the dignity and freedom of every individual, I ask you all to continue support for this noble cause of freedom. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome former chairman and CEO of PepsiCo, Indra Nooyi.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Seohyun. What an inspiring testimony from her. It makes you want to pause, to reflect, and to be thankful that we're all here in the United States, a country founded on universal values and an enlightening vision of what we stand for: peace, democracy, and the freedom of every person to live their own life. I have lived a lucky life in two great democracies. I was born into independent India 8 years of after the country was freed from 350 years of occupation. I have been so fortunate that I've never had to experience what it's like to live without peace, without democracy, and without freedom to lead my own life. Those freedoms brought me from the world's largest democracy to the nation that John Adams said was a land made in broad daylight. And it allowed me to thrive and contribute in both countries. But sadly, not everyone is so lucky. And over the years, I've watched, read, and listened to so many stories of those that don't enjoy those basic freedoms. And I've come to realize that for those of us with freedom comes responsibility, an awesome responsibility. That in addition to the words on the founding documents, we need to feel the truth of what's at stake. We need to feel the truth of what's at stake. We need to feel stories like this, The Ministry of Unification, a department of the South Korean government, says that more than 34,000 defectors have made the journey from North to South Korea. 34,000 stories of families and relatives left behind as some seek freedom to lead their own lives. It's why conversations like the one we're going to have today matter. How the global powers with the values that respect the rights of each individual engages with the world. You know, foreign policy is not abstract. It's about who we sell arms to, whose food we buy, whose oppression we tolerate, and how we use soft power to win over countries when change needs to happen. We should be worried about countries who don't share our values spreading their influence around the world. When China builds an airport in Pakistan, high-speed railway in Indonesia, ports in Ethiopia, when the president of Venezuela calls Putin's election an exemplary act of democracy, and when Iran rewrites the book on proxy warfare. These are all troubling examples. At the same time, there are glimmers of hope. I look at activists around the world in Sudan and Ethiopia, or right here in the United States, who put everything on the line to be in the streets demanding their rights. Thomas Jefferson once said that the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. The price of freedom is eternal vigilance. And that is as true today as ever. So with the expertise and experience to talk about all of this and more, I'm delighted to introduce our very impressive next panel. William Inboden runs the Hamilton Center at the University of Florida, and he is one of America's foremost scholars on the presidency and US statecraft. And then we have Nicole Bobbins Sedaca from the Freedom House, and Nicole spent a decade in the State Department working on democracy and human rights. And then we have Ambassador Mark Green, who leads the Wilson Center, and he is a particular expert in international development, having played a critical role in so many poverty reduction efforts that America enabled around the world. And finally, our moderator is the brilliant Igor Khrestin from right here in the Bush Center. So let's give all of them a warm welcome. Thank you.
Morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us. I want to start by saying how honored I am to work here alongside people like Joseph, Kim, Natalie, Chris, and others who every day come to work trying to advance free societies and freedom. And how also as a Ukrainian American, I'm so over the moon that Alice Zhuravell could make it here and really showcase the diversity and the spirit of Ukraine, which is very important, and that's our biggest tool in the fight against authoritarianism. But let me open this panel with a little bit of history. On January 3rd, 1975, President Gerald Ford signed into law a bill called the Trade Act of 1974. Inside that very innocuously named bill was an amendment that arguably changed the course of Cold War history. Sponsored by Senator Scoop Jackson of Washington and Congressman Charles Winnick of Ohio, the language in that bill conditioned U.S. trade benefits for countries based on whether they allowed free immigration of persecuted minorities, most notably the Soviet Jewry. The idea was controversial at the time. It was opposed by the so-called realists, that's a dirty word around here, by the way, and the business community, unfortunately, but it won and became a staple of U.S.-Soviet relations. So the Jackson-Vanik Amendment became a vital tool of human rights defenders and freedom fighters around the world. And most importantly, in the words of dissident icons like Natan Sharansky and Andrei Sakharov, it was spelled the beginning of the end for Soviet communism. So by the time the Soviet Union collapsed, this amendment allowed for more than 1 million Jews, Catholics, evangelical Christians, and other persecuted minorities to leave for the United States, Israel, and other free nations. That number also included my own family, the Khrestin's, who arrived here from Ukraine with nothing more than a few suitcases and a dream of freedom and opportunity, which is what we strive for here at the Bush Institute. So we fast forward to today. Vladimir Putin is waging a brutal war in Ukraine in an attempt to rebuild the Soviet Empire. China, under Xi Jinping, has emerged as our nation's long-term national security, economic, and technological threat. Taiwan, a free island of 23 million people, now fears it could suffer the same fate as Ukraine, unless the free world led by the United States prevents that outcome. So with this distinguished panel today, featuring Ambassador Mike Green, Nicole Bobbins, Sedaca, and Dr. Will Inboden, we will try to explore where do freedom and human rights fit into this brave new world of the so-called great power competition. So in essence, the question is, does the call of freedom still matter as a US strategic imperative? So I want to kick off this panel with a historian, Dr. Will Inboden. Will, you've just written a terrific book about Ronald Reagan and the way he operationalized, so to speak, the questions of liberty in the struggle against the Soviet Empire. So maybe we'll start off there and with a question of, is the United States the only great power in history that prioritizes freedom, democracy, and human rights as strategic imperatives?
The short answer is yes. This is one of several ways that the United States is a unique and exceptional nation. One could make a case that the British Empire in the 19th century, with their leading efforts to abolish the international slave trade, put some values in the service of their power. But in terms of a great power that puts values, human rights, democracy, freedom, liberty at the center of our power and of our purpose in the world, the United States really is unique. And it came to the fore with the peaceful end of the Cold War, where President Reagan had adopted a new strategy of putting human rights and democracy at the center of American policy overall. He saw the Soviet Union's oppression of its people, oppression of the peoples of Central and Eastern Europe. He saw that as a vulnerability, and he saw those people as natural allies for the United States. And he sought to support them in their quest for a better life and to help turn them against their own governments. They already disinclined to their governments, but I'm glad that you had started off with the Jackson-Vanik Amendment, because he was a big proponent of that and used that as a tool there. And so using that sort of soft power, that sort of moral capital that the United States had in supporting those dissidents, played a key role in the eventual crumbling of the Soviet Union and a peaceful victory in the Cold War. So the United States is certainly unique in that respect, and it's something I hope that we have not too much forgotten today.
Well, I hope so as well. But unfortunately, and I'll come to Nicole now, who, in addition to being our distinguished senior fellow here at the Bush Institute, is also the executive vice president of Freedom House. So you know where she stands on freedom, right? You're pro-freedom, Nicole.
I am.
Great. But unfortunately, in our latest report, 18 years in a row of decline of freedom. So we've unfortunately had a really bad streak about freedom on the global stage. And so maybe you can tell us why that is. Why are we seeing this?
Excellent. Well, first, let me just say thank you it's wonderful to be part of the panel, because I always feel when I come home to Dallas that it's great to be in a place where people can speak with such clarity and conviction about freedom, about why the world being free is important to each of us as individuals. We have indeed seen 18 years of democratic decline in the world, and what that means is that we're seeing more countries and territories where people are experiencing fewer political freedoms, fewer civil liberties, than we are seeing countries where that's getting better. That's a really bad statistic, and what I'd like to do is sort of put it in the context of what our panel is about today. What that means for human rights is fewer people every single day are experiencing what we have the privilege to experience. The ability to worship freely, the ability to speak our minds, to criticize our politicians, to be able to go to the ballot box freely and vote. Those are privileges and rights that are being experiencing less by fewer and fewer people every single day. But it's not just about those rights for individuals. That is an important part. That's what gets us up every day. But it is about what is the world and the neighborhood that we want to live in. What is that global order that we want to live in? The more countries that are turning autocratic, that are willing to close the space for their own citizens, the less safe we are. Those are not countries that we are as eager to trade with, to go into military or security agreements with. Those are the countries also that are less likely to be stable neighbors, to be neighbors that will bring peace to their regions. And what we're seeing is those crises and those difficult spots around the world where we see refugees being produced, where we see people denied their rights, and where we see security problems are those countries where you have leaders that are unwilling to stand for freedom, to build strong democracies. And so the correlation between human rights and the world that we want to live in, that's secure and prosperous and democratic, are just deeply, deeply intertwined.
Well, thank you for that. Mark, over to you. You know, in your sort of distinguished career, but you've just come back from Ukraine. So maybe talk about sort of the fight for freedom and this new global order that you've sort of seen there, and maybe given your sort of experience running AID, the development, the post-war development challenges that Ukraine faces and reconstruction challenges.
Sure, thanks, and great to be with all of you. And it is important when we talk about the world we want to see. I'll just give you this statistic. Later this year, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees is likely to announce that there are 130 million displaced people in the world today, which is almost double the number from not even a decade ago. What are they fleeing? They're fleeing protracted conflict, man-made, regime-driven authoritarian crackdown. That's why people flee. They flee to freedom. And so it's also in our self-interest to address the drivers of these conflicts. I was in Ukraine. So I was in Ukraine in 2014. I was an election observer with Madeleine Albright, first post-Maidan elections. And I saw there Ukrainian people under constant threat from Moscow. In fact, the night before the voting, a lot of the election commissioners received anonymous text messages saying, "We know where you live." And yet they stood in line for hours to vote. That same courage is alive today. I look at the resilience of the Ukrainian people. It's extraordinary. It's quite a remarkable thing. Kyiv was the last stop. We went 1,300 miles around the country to formerly Russian-occupied territory. As we were getting towards Kyiv, there was a missile strike on an apartment building, and I said to the delegation, we need to go and see the damage. Within hours, they're rebuilding. Within hours, they are trying to restore some semblance of normalcy. In the threatened areas, children are going to school in subway stations because Zelensky is committed to making sure that they have a normal life as much as possible with education opportunities. So I'm impressed with what I see. What I fear is that we cannot, as the leaders of the free world, we cannot be sending mixed messages about who we're with and how much it matters. We're all hoping that this supplemental bill will pass sometime over the weekend, hopefully, but it's not even the dollar figures. I think it's extraordinarily important for the U.S. to send an unambiguous message. We're with you. We're standing with you. We actually believe in democracy. We believe in sovereignty. We think it actually matters. And that's what's important here. I mean, just to tackle something, I'm the development guy, right? Freedom is good development. Sending out a message to Africa, saying to young Africans, look, we want you to go from being aid recipients to partners to fellow donors. Aspirational leadership is essential and not a moment too soon. I think it's extraordinarily important that we continue to project that. It's good for those we're trying to benefit, but it's good for us. More allies, more partners, and a better world, as you've said.
Well, thank you for that. Since you've mentioned Africa, let me turn to that and use a practical example of U.S. leadership, which is the PEPFAR program, the President's Emergency Program for AIDS Relief, a truly innovative program started 20 years ago by President Bush that saved 25 million lives on the African continent, but not just It operates in Ukraine to this day, even during wartime, and we were privileged to have last year, during our 20th anniversary of PEPFAR event, some advocates from Ukraine who helped ferry these retroviral drugs even during war zones. And it was U.S. leadership that got us this outcome. We were pleased, as David Kramer, our executive director, calls it a qualified victory, to have a one-year reauthorization of the program. But picking up on the example of PEPFAR, what are some tools at our disposal right now like that we can use in this great power competition, and especially on the African continent?
Well, first off, as a general matter, in an era of great power competition, showing people what we stand for is crucial. That's the competition. You know, I used to talk about the journey to self-reliance. We want countries to be self-reliant, to be able to lead themselves. With a Chinese investment in Africa, if a country becomes more self-reliant, someone in Beijing is going to lose their job or end up in prison, right? That's the opposite of what they want. And so I think laying out this competing visions, that's how we succeed. And that's what young people around the world want. Particular programs, Millennium Challenge Corporation, which is celebrating an anniversary, and President Bush was obviously the man who led us to create that. That's an extraordinarily important tool, not only because of the assistance it provides, but what it incentivizes and what it stands for. Very, very important. But also PEPFAR, not just the compassion, but PEPFAR requires countries to do difficult things, to undertake reforms. And that was crucial. That was the embodiment of the Bush vision for the world. That's why failing to reauthorize it, I think, is a very dangerous thing. Because if I'm an African leader being asked to do difficult things, and I have some doubt as to whether or not the U.S. is going to be there a few years from now, why would I do those things? So all of these tools, I don't think you can separate from the message of democracy and freedom, because it is what we stand for. It's what our partner countries want to see. It's also good for development. It's good for business.
Can I just pick up on one point on that? I agree with absolutely everything that Mark said, and would just add that when the United States is not in those spaces, using those tools, integrating democracy into our development tools, into our conversations on security, it's not as if there's then just emptiness. Right. There are active foes that are moving into that space, that are already in that space. And Mark mentioned China is in many places where either we've seen a lack of United States engagement, or we've seen US engagement, but China just comes in a bigger way. They are cutting deals which are undercutting the democratic development in a lot of countries, in Africa, in Latin America, and other regions. They are cutting really bad deals which are pinning these countries to a debt trap in many, many places. And part of that debt trap is also tying the infrastructure of these countries, their ports, their railroads, their airports to Chinese investment, and quite often then leaving these countries worse off than they were before. And the signal that many of these countries are getting quite often when they don't have leaders that are representing the people's interests is, well, China was there for us. And I think we have a choice right now as the United States to say, what is the partnership we want to have with these countries? What voices do we want speaking into these nations, and the partnerships we want developed with these nations? Because that's where many of these nations are choosing to turn, and they have a choice. And if the United States is not there, it will be other countries.
If I can just add a two-finger to that. So I often tell people, again, aspirational models. I've had the good fortune of traveling to every part of Africa. I've visited many countries. In all of my travel, I have never met an African who said, you know, I really want to be Chinese. Doesn't happen, right? Why? Because it's the values, it's not the territory of the U.S., it's the values that we represent and the principles. And if we're not modeling them and we're not projecting them, it's bad strategic leadership. It's bad national security policy as well.
Okay, Igor, can I chime in too? Sorry, you're trying to moderate us. And
Moderate yourselves. Moderate among yourselves.
No,
moderate among
just a foot stomp on a couple great things here. First, in addition to looking at China's malevolence with this debt trap diplomacy and other things like that, China and Russia are very committed to exporting authoritarianism, right? Look how Russia has bolstered Lukashenko in Belarus, how it's bolstered Assad in Syria, how China is exporting surveillance equipment to other dictatorships to be able to monitor and control their people. And so if you look across the globe, you know, our authoritarian great power rivals, China and Russia especially, are generally on the side of dictatorship and oppression. And the United States has historically been on the side of freedom, right? And this is where, you know, before I started this second career in as a scholar, I had the privilege of serving in the Bush administration as a policymaker, where Nicole and I became friends, where David Kramer and I became friends. And working at the State Department and the NSC in the Bush administration, had the chance to travel the world, right, and was doing a lot of work on human rights and religious freedom and democracy. And what I was struck over and over when I went to China and met with house church pastors there, when I went to Vietnam and met with dissidents there, when I went to Eritrea, when I went to Saudi Arabia, and you're meeting with dissidents in these countries, we'd hear about their situation, we'd ask what the United States can do to support them, we'd let them know that President Bush is on their side of freedom. And then I would often ask them, you know, any other countries that are supporting you? And I would say, no, it's only the United States, right? It's only the United States that is on the side of, now sometimes our allies will come along with us in this, but when Hong Kong protesters are taking the streets in 2019, they're asking against Beijing's oppression, they're asking for support from the United States. When Iranian protesters go on the streets, they're asking for support from the United States. So even as we in America are starting to doubt our own commitment to freedom and do we have anything to offer to the world, freedom-loving and freedom-minded people in the rest of the world are looking to us for leadership. They see us as their champion. Yeah. And woe to us if we disregard or betray that.
Well, absolutely. The demand for U.S. leadership is sky high. It's the supply, I think, you know, that we want to increase just to make it all work on those economic scales. Let me ask a question about adapting our approaches to freedom, democracy, and human rights to environments like Russia and China, where those concepts have different meanings. And I'll use something that you had in your book, which is the May 1988 speech that President Reagan conducted with the students of the MGU, the Moscow State University, which is a fascinating exchange, and I encourage everyone to read it fully. And what President Reagan did was use a lot of concepts from Russia's own history to drive home the values and to say, we share the same values. He cited Dostoevsky, he cited Chekhov, he cited Turgenev, quite a number of Russian authors and others and Russian idioms to make it relatable. You know, and I think in the Q&A they try to throw him off with some planted questions, but I think he managed to come out on top of that, and then it seeded, I think, a very important element. How do we do that? How do we relate? How do we seed those plans in societies that seem impenetrable, where the state has taken over, oftentimes in brutal ways, and our message sometimes can be off-key, especially with the economic sort of incentives and other things. How do we do that effectively?
I'll take a quick stab, and I'm sure the others will have some thoughts as well. But yeah, this was part of President Reagan's, I think, genius. Was this wasn't an effort to export some sort of, you know, to caricature one-size-fits-all template of American-style democracy elsewhere. Rather, it was to support people's aspirations for freedom in their own land, in their own culture, in their own history, and connecting those resources in their traditions. Because every culture and society does have some of these resources. Russia certainly did, and Reagan tapped into that. President Bush did as well, especially in the broader Middle East. You know, I was just recently went back and reread his November 2003 speech to the National Endowment for Democracy, calling for a new American strategy of supporting voices for freedom in the Middle East, reminding us that you know, that stability at the price of liberty ultimately gives us neither. But whether in the Reagan administration or the Bush administration, the United States was adept at using our innovation, our technology, our creativity to find new tools and new ways to break through, the Great Firewall in China, if you will, or the Iron Curtain in the Soviet Union. The Reagan days, the CIA had a massive covert action program. It's been declassified now, so I can talk about it publicly, obviously, of flooding the Iron Curtain in Russia with cassette tapes. This is before CDs or MP3s, right? Cassette tapes of sermons, of speeches about freedom, of Solzhenitsyn novels, Dr. Zhivago, Pasternak as well. And yeah, we had to be creative about it, but there are ways to get through and reach the people directly. China has, the CCP has obviously gotten ahead of the curve on that now, but we can catch up. And the country that sent a man to the moon, the country that is the birthplace of Silicon Valley, right? We can, if we put more of our know-how behind that, we can connect with the people and support them and their own aspirations for freedom.
Thank you.
I would just add, echoing everything that Will said, it's not a lack of capacity, it's a lack of will, right? We have all of the smart people here who can figure this out. I think one of the main things is doing what the Bush Institute just did earlier, which is elevating the voices of people from those countries. They are the best people to articulate why freedom matters, because they have lived without it and they are experiencing it here. I think I have never, in my travels also in various positions, never gone to a country where people are like, I love getting my house broken into in the middle of the night and having my family rounded up and thrown in prison. I love the fact that I can't worship the way I want to. I love that I have to really whisper in my house because I know I'm being surveilled. Never. Which means that many of those issues, many of those freedoms are so universal and they're so inherent to every human being. It's not, when people talk about the United States imposing or the United States bringing one-size-fits-all model, that's actually not what we're talking about. We're talking about giving people the space to experience the freedoms. Those are universal. The model of democracy, we've got many of them, some of them better than others, but we've got lots of models. So it's about allowing a local contextualization of what are universal freedoms. And I think if we continue to talk about that, we elevate the voices of people in those countries who are demanding it at the great cost of their lives and their livelihoods, elevate their voices to show that this really is a universal struggle.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think when we approach this work overseas, a couple of things to keep in mind. Number one is a sense of humility. Yeah. So when I was ambassador in Tanzania in the Bush administration, I used to say, look, I'm not saying we've got all the answers. I'm saying maybe we've made all the mistakes along the way. You actually get to learn from our experience as our friends. And when I said that, you could almost see everyone saying, okay, this is great. You've got humility. You're on the same journey that we are. And I think that's really important. And then secondly, be aspirational. Mm-hmm. Too many of our leaders talk like technocrats and they get caught up in the give and take. Talk about where it is that we all want to go. And talk about the universality of these principles and values. You don't have to get terribly specific. You simply have to inspire and then look for ways to provide the tools. We need to be a force for good. We need to be aspirational in the way we talk about the world and America's role in that world.
Well, thank you. And with the 5 minutes we have left, I'm going to pick up on that with a very easy question, which won't be easy. Given what we've experienced in our country over the last several years, January 6th, and many other, frankly, anti-democratic moments and dark forces of isolationism and otherwise, can the United States credibly go around the world, even with humility, even in some way, and say, we are the paragon of freedom and democracy, you should be like us? How do we square that, and what do we do about it here, and how do we approach that? So
I'll jump in on that super easy question, which I'm sure I'll solve within the next 30 seconds. I very much echo what Mark said. I often also talk about humility, but I'd like to say humble confidence, right? Mm-hmm. And humble meaning we have made a lot of mistakes. Mm-hmm. But we have confidence in the very foundational ideas of democracy, because those don't change when you mess up. Those truths and those universal principles upon which our country was founded as we were messing up, but also we're building a great nation, those truths still hold, right? They are still self-evident. And it is a way of saying, What you're seeing in the United States is a working out of those principles, and it is about, we have a choice at ballot boxes, we have a choice every day how we show up in public and online, how we engage as civic members of our community, how we elect our local and national leaders, how the media acts, how we have checks and balances. All of those pieces are choices that we have the opportunity to make, and that is what democracy is about. Democracy is never a guarantee that you're going to have everyone behaving well, or that you will expunge all of the illiberal actors. What it means is that you will have a system that will allow us to deal with those problems when they come up, and so we as a nation have an opportunity to model how you deal with challenges in your society.
So I'll just offer a note of hope in some ways and perspective from history, right? So, and the takeaway is this: if we wait until we are in perfect condition here at home to lead abroad, we'll never get around to it, right? So the United States led the Allies to victory over Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan in World War II. You know, one of the greatest struggles for freedom in human history, while we were interning Japanese Americans in internment camps and maintaining a segregated military and separate units for black Americans, right? I mean, that's appalling, right? The hypocrisy is horrible. But the fact that we did those things wrong doesn't mean we shouldn't have led the fight in World War II. In the early Cold War, in the 50s and 60s, again, we're wanting to be the exemplar of liberty and rally the free world to confront the menace of Soviet totalitarianism. Well, we had Jim Crow at home in the United States. And the Soviets made great hay of that. They, their propaganda went to town on our hypocrisy there. And eventually we did correct that, and we were right to do so, but it doesn't mean that we should, unilaterally surrender in the Cold War until we can get there. But the other point is this: sometimes those external threats and challenges can bring out our best and help expose to us, hey, just as we do need to help lead the free world and lead the forces of liberty against oppression abroad, this can rally our country to a greater sense of purpose. It can help us maybe overcome some of those divisions and shine a little bit of a spotlight on things that we still need to get right. So great countries can do both things at once, and we need to.
Excellent.
Yeah, I think, yes, that's worth applauding.
Thank you.
I think what we should be modeling is not perfection. It is instead openness about our system of debate and discussion. I don't need consensus, I need constructive disagreement. That's what we're not doing well. We should embrace our disagreements, take them on constructively. That's the message that we want the rest of the world to see. Not unity, not lockstep, but instead that in the marketplace of ideas, you can disagree. It's okay. It's how you get to the right answer, and it's how you reshape yourself. We have made mistakes. We should never engage in self-flagellation. We should fix them. Take them on and show the world this is what a democracy can do that no authoritarian system can do.
Well, thank you. That's a terrific, hopeful note to end our panel on, unfortunately, because I think we could stay here for hours discussing these very important issues. But please join me in thanking our distinguished panelists here today.